Story 1. Back when there were only 152 Pokemon, I was a kid obsessed with memorizing them according to their Pokédex number. There was a big Pokemon event in our town, and I joined the How Many Pokemon You Can Name in 60 Seconds competition, convinced I would win. I froze up halfway and couldn't remember the rest. I had to resort to naming random Pokemon that came to mind. The kid who won simply recited the Pokrap. Story 2. Everyone talks about the common pregnancy side effects like random food cravings, pains, and mood changes, etc. It's not talked about, but it's also common to crave non-foods like dirt. It's embarrassing to feel, and it's embarrassing to admit, even when my doctor tells me it's normal and okay. It's hard to accept that dirt sounds delicious right now. Hormones are crazy. Story 3. When I was around 14 to 15, in a misguided attempt to appear more cultured than I would spend my free time memorizing Shakespeare sonnets and monologues for the sole purpose of being able to quote them in conversation and make people think I was sophisticated. To this day, I can still recite Hamlet's soliloquy in its entirety by heart, but have never actually read Hamlet. Story 4. I was unhealthily obsessed with Santa. I would write him over-the-top thank you letters and put so much effort into making a box of handmade things as presents for him. Funnily enough, it wasn't self-serving. I wouldn't ever ask for much in the way of presents. I just wanted him to know how much I appreciated him and wanted to be his favorite. I was a weird child. Story 5. Mapping out fictional nations, which sounds harmless enough, but I had a binder full of maps and constitutions and carried it around with me everywhere while I was in school. These weren't anything remotely resembling normal fantasy nations, but usually concept nations revolving around one or more psychotic ideals, and I usually named them all after myself for convenience. They were almost always micronations based around absurd goals like building an economy from house cats or total self-sufficiency. I understood that no one would want to participate in any of my absurd societies, so there were usually secret police and extensive surveillance systems, with human rights being explicitly denied in the Constitution. Again, it was always all named after me. Anonland, with the Anon police or the Anontiers, farming house cats to fuel the propaganda machine, or Anontons sleeping upright in cubicles and growing food with their own waste. This exercise only felt meaningful if it could be actualized by my own efforts. What's the point of imagining unlimited resources for yourself? So these were all meant to be nations that I could conceivably start even if I never planned to. I had this huge binder full of maps and laws and step-by-step plans to acquire territory and capital, along with descriptions of how I would maintain discipline and order in the service of constructing a nation of cat farmers in my own image. On multiple occasions, I nearly had panic attacks when I thought it might be discovered, like when I forgot it overnight in the locker I shared with a friend and then didn't go to school the next day. Story 6. Writing erotic fiction to several of my female friends. I made sure that they were receptive to it before letting my freak flag fly, and they all enjoyed it. All but one of them would write hot and steamy replies. Some of them were even sleazier than my writing. We were discreet, but it would have been embarrassing if anyone else found out. Story 7. When I was 4 to 5 years old, I had a huge crush on Betty Rubble. I'd lay in front of the television when the Flintstones came on, just waiting to get a glimpse of Betty. Story 8. When I was about 11, I learned that lasers were light passed through crystals. So I drew a picture of a gun handle on a flashlight with a crystal in front of the light. I called it the Laser Gun 2000. This was the 80s, just so we're clear. I then called the United States Patent Office and tried to get it patented. Come to think of it, maybe that's not embarrassing. It's kind of funny. Story 9. One obsession I had that went way beyond normal was collecting Funko Pop figures. I started with just a few and then found myself hunting down rare ones, even driving across town to grab a limited edition. At one point, I had over 100 on display and realized I was spending more time organizing them than actually enjoying them. It got pretty out of hand, but eventually, I let go of the obsession. I still have a few, but definitely not to the same extreme. Story 10. When I was around 11 or 12, I had an obsession with saying spells, doing rituals, creating potions, and chanting to try and become a mermaid or develop possible invisibility powers, among lots of other things. I truly believed they would work, and I was so sad when they didn't. I kept trying for a good year. My parents have a video of it. Story 11. Role-playing with my friends in notebooks during middle school and high school. We had dedicated original characters on the first page and writing on the rest, with the most dramatic plots you could imagine. A teacher tried to punish us for passing notes by reading them aloud. It was vampire night romance. She ultimately called our parents instead. 0 out of 10. Story 12. When I was 11, my best friend and I started hanging around the local skate park. We quickly became completely obsessed with one skateboarder. I'll call him Chris, who was 15. We went down every day to watch him, even when it was raining. We would sit in the empty park if nobody was there. I graffitied Allen cake for Chris around the park, and my mom saw it and docked my pocket money. We drew on t-shirts that said, "I love Chris" and "Chris Fan Club," and wore them all the time. I styled my hair in different ways to get his attention and wore my mother's dangly earrings. Poor Chris was an absolute gentleman to us and had the patience of a saint. Years later, we ended up going to the same college for a while, and I apologized so much. Again, he was a total sweetheart and said it was all water under the bridge. Story 13. I get food obsessions right before my period, like a crazy pregnant lady. 10 p.m. and randomly need something incredibly obscure I haven't eaten in years. This happens for about a week, and for the rest of the month, I'm perfectly normal craving-wise. Story 14. Boy bands. I dress like them. I'm brown and a female, so, wishing and hoping I would meet them, had posters all over my wall. Hanson, I'm looking at you. Story 15. I once had a full-on obsession with collecting those little tiny hotel shampoos and conditioners. I would grab a bunch from every hotel I stayed at, even if I didn't need them. I had a whole stash at home, just sitting there, completely unused. It wasn't even that I liked them. I think I just got addicted to the idea of collecting them. Story 16. I've had many intense obsessions throughout my life, but nothing beats when I was 13 and utterly fascinated by the September 11th attacks. I'm pretty sure I've watched that second plane hit the South Tower from every possible angle on YouTube. Story 17. Making sure I have 0 email notifications on my personal email. I have friends with Gmail accounts that have thousands of unopened or junk emails. Delete it or open it is my motto. Story 18. When I was young, I used to have complete relationships in my head with girls I had a crush on. I was always trying to convince myself there was something there between us, while in reality, there was nothing. Story 19. I had this huge obsession with Doctor Who. Still do, but my cousin and I were obsessed. It wasn't embarrassing, just hilarious. I failed one of my finals because I was busy researching other roles David Tennant played instead of studying for school. Story 20. I was obsessed with Falker, the flying dragon from the never-ending story. I would go out into fields, waiting for him to come and swoop me away. I would write letters and put them in trees for Falker. This went on for a while. Story 21. Hard to pick. Everything about me was weird and embarrassing. It's a four-way tie between Lego Ninjago, eating only one food for weeks on end, honeycomb candy, wearing fedoras, and spying on couples. Edit. Forgot to mention my phases where I was really obsessed with Nazis and Rasputin. Story 22. Bjork, the artist, not the tree, since seeing her on MTV in the 1990s. Nothing can deter me from her. Even finding out Bjork might be ill-mannered won't faze me. She is my queen. Story 23. I was obsessed with John Cougar Mellencamp in the late 1980s to early 1990s. Obsessed. I had every tape, made a medallion with his initials in art class, and even had a little shrine in my room made out of a box covered in pictures cut out from magazines and finished with a string of Christmas lights. I was convinced that I would marry him. Story 24. It's 1985. I am 13 and totally obsessed with synth player Howard Jones. I do everything in my power to look like him and walk like him. People start calling me Hojo. I start signing my name as Jones on my schoolwork, worrying my teachers and parents. Then one day I realize the guy is kind of embarrassing, and I regret it to this day, cringing at myself. I am now in my 50s. Story 25. Guys with eyebrow piercings. I had a folder when I was about 14 on my computer of pictures of guys with eyebrow piercings. I never did anything inappropriate with them, I used to just look through them and swoon. Story 26. I used to be obsessed with Sherlock the TV series, to the point of insanity. Oh man, I wrote fanfiction and everything. I literally dedicated my life to it. I would draw them constantly, rewatch the show to the point of knowing all the lines. It was the only thing I'd talk about, and I would use fancy words like Sherlock without knowing what they meant, though I still use egregious as it's a great word. I would live tweet when watching the episodes with all my thoughts. I had a popular Tumblr with thousands of followers where I was solely obsessed with Sherlock and publishing fanfiction. I had photos I printed and cut out by hand of different scenes in the show and stuck them all over my walls. In one diary entry, I thanked the show for saving my life as I was an incredibly depressed and bullied teen. At one point, I even harmed myself by writing the word Sherlock on me because the show upset me, and I was trying to stay alive to watch the new series when it came out. It was really, really strange. Looking back now, it was a mediocre show at best and quite embarrassing that I was so into it, but it was my ultimate obsession for quite a few years as a teen. I was also obsessed with cheese puffs dipped in peanut butter at one point. That one might be weirder. Story 27. Memorized every Harry Potter spell in case someday I would need it. I used to have them listed and glued to my mirror and would recite them every day as I got ready for school. Story 28. I was a teenager in 1983, and for a brief time I was obsessed with Def Leppard. I made a scrapbook filled with pictures I cut out of magazines. After seeing them in concert, I framed the ticket stub and hung it over my night table. So embarrassing. Story 29. Being able to wiggle my eyebrows caterpillar style like this kid that appeared on The Big Breakfast. I was obsessed for 6 months training, then got bored. Now 30 years later, I can still raise one eyebrow but not the other. Story 30. Saw a band in December, opened an Instagram account just to follow them, and made a complete fool of myself. But I am also working on getting them a major gig in a few months. Also a bit obsessive, but hey, what girl doesn't want to see the two hottest bands on her birthday? Story 31. Baby things but not kid baby things. Like, for example, small bottles of alcohol. I called it a baby Bailey's. I like baby fireballs too. I'm obsessed with all things tiny or baby-sized. I found a baby glass jar of Nutella, and my partner got it for me and called it my emotional support Nutella. Small containers of peanut butter, the travel size. It really is embarrassing, and no, I never open or use them. Just obsessed and collect. Story 32. I hyperfixate on things that click with me and have had many over the years. Harry Potter, Steven Universe, Hamilton, Undertale, Five Nights at Freddy's, Dragon Ball Z. Take your pick. In my opinion, Hamilton or Five Nights at Freddy's was probably the more embarrassing one. Story 33. For me, one that comes to mind is being completely obsessed with collecting stamps as a kid. Yes, you read that right. Stamps. I had binders full of them and would spend hours organizing and researching them. I'm not even sure what the appeal was, other than the sense of achievement from getting rare stamps from different countries. I remember friends would come over and I'd excitedly show them my collection, and they'd look at me like, okay, cool. Not exactly the peak of coolness. But hey, it was a phase. Story 34. As a teenager, I tried to read every single piece of published work about the John F. Kennedy assassination. I am still no closer to solving the riddle. Just watch Days of Future Past. I understand the Magneto reference now. Story 35. I had an anonymous fan account for a band I like. I still like them. I no longer specifically edit pictures just to post and talk about them, but I used to have my own independent Instagram for it. Story 36. I have a lot of Star Wars Lego minifigures, probably more than what is normal for a 47-year-old man. What can I say? I was obsessed with Legos and Star Wars as a kid, and after my son was born in 2008, I found the perfect excuse to buy them. He lost interest about 7 years ago, but I keep buying the sets and displaying them in my home office. Story 37. Not me, but a friend in college memorized the Pokédex for the original 151 Pokémon. You could call out a number and he could tell you the Pokémon, its story, its weight, and so on. I kind of yelled at him because he ended up flunking out of school. I was like, if you can study and spend time memorizing all that, you could have spent some time on your classes. Story 38. All of my stuffed animals were real. They had to be individually cared for. If they weren't being played with, they were placed at specific vantage points to have the best outlook on anything going on in my room. They had feelings, dreams, and purpose. If we were at a store, I would want so badly to buy another one and add it to my collection. But I had analysis paralysis in choosing a new stuffed animal because I didn't know if they would get along with the other ones I already had. What might they talk about? Would they have similar interests? Would they be able to share clothing? Were they a boy or a girl? Was I outnumbering the boys? Was I outnumbering the girls? Would this new stuffed animal like to read books with me? Or would this new one be a jerk, and I would have to kick him out? What if I had to kick him out? If I kicked him out, where would he go? Would he get thrown in a dumpster? We can't allow that. If he gets readopted and goes to some new house, would they take care of him the way I would take care of them? What if they are abused? Right about that time, my mom would yell at me to pick one or I wouldn't get any, and I ended up not buying one. That was probably best because the rest of the family just assumed I would want a generic stuffed animal of any type at any time, and they bought several of them. Then I had the same guilt of, well, it's mine now. Guess I have another one to take care of, followed by a stern lecture to the stuffed animal on house rules and how to behave with the other ones who had more seniority. This was a 5 to 6 year period of my life.